So welcome everyone to our first BMS Talk of 2025 and Happy New Year to you all. Thank you for joining us. So I'll start by introducing you to the chair for this event, Gary Easton. Gary's background is mainly in agriculture and farm and exotic livestock, particularly as an elephant keeper in Chester Zoo. He also worked for Gareth Griffith at Aberystwyth University on the conservation and ecology of waxcap and other chegg fungi. Gary's now retired and is an active member of the Devon Fungus Group and also a member of the BMS's Fungal Education and Outreach Committee. So thank you very much, Gary. I'll hand over to you now and thank you.
Okay, where am I? Am I on? Oh, here we go. Oh. Hello.
Yes, you're there, Gary. We can see you.
Well, I can't see myself. I don't know why.
Oh, that's it. Maybe because of the screen sharing.
Yeah, it could be. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't need to see myself. I know what I look like. Good evening, everybody, and as Sally said, Happy New Year. A really interesting talk this evening, I think, with as you can see on the screen, mushrooms in Japanese culture, given by Nathaniel Guy. He's an American originally from Kentucky, but for nearly 10 years, I think, has lived in Japan. He's a translator, he's a keen amateur mycologist, and he's an engineer by trade. So an interesting spectrum of things. He's he produced a mushroom app translating Japanese, I hope I pronounce this right, wame names into English names. And he's also an officer in the Tokyo Mushroom Society. So he really knows his stuff. I've read his book, which I would recommend. It's very, very fun book, very interesting. And that's it. I think we're in for a good evening. Oh, the only other thing, I want to thank him very much for having to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning in Japan to give us this talk. And I hope he can, well, I'm sure he can stay awake. Okay, so that's it. Nathaniel, carry on.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Gary. And it's a pleasure to join everybody today. Thank you so much for inviting me. So yes, it is now 5 a.m. in Japan, and bright and early, I am excited to talk to all of you about mushrooms in Japanese culture. And first, a little introduction. Gary already gave me a little bit of an introduction, so thank you so much for that. I am from Kentucky in the United States originally, although I've lived in many different states within the United States, as well as several different places within Japan since then. My day job, among other things, as I'm a software engineer in the space industry, I've worked in NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, SpaceX, a few different Japanese space companies such as Astroscale. And before that, I was working in the video game industry. I first got interested in mushrooms while I was a software engineer at Nintendo of America in Seattle, Washington. And so that's how I got into mushrooms. Was I was in Seattle, Washington. There's a very big mushroom community, Puget Sound Mycological Society, as it's called. But I also really love Japan. I've been studying Japanese seriously since 2001 when I studied it in college and spent a year abroad. And since then, I've been working as a Japanese translator and interpreter and bilingual engineer, mostly in technical areas for technical Japanese interpretation and translation. I moved to Japan in 2018. This time, it's the third time I've lived in Japan, actually. And after moving in 2018, I finally started to get involved in mushrooms in Japanese. I made a lot of Japanese mushroom friends, you might say, and became an officer in the Tokyo Mushroom Society. And I got to do a lot of fun things in Japan. I got to do mushroom hunting on Mount Fuji, which was really nice. I've published several articles about mushrooms in Japanese and in local journals and Japanese websites. I've volunteered with the Tokyo Mushroom Society for both mushroom collection and mushroom explanation. And I wrote a book, which Gary mentioned, and I'll talk about a little bit more, called Kinoko, a book about mushrooms in Japan. And I even appeared on Japanese television to talk about mushrooms and do mushroom hunting on a very popular primetime TV show. I do screenshots from that. It was kind of fun. My colleague from the Tokyo Mushroom Society and I went on to hunt for poisonous mushrooms. So this is me. This is back during COVID days, so everyone's wearing a mask. And they decided this is either a point of pride or a point of embarrassment, but they decided to spend some time talking about my clothes before the segment, saying, look at this mushroom nerd and his socks and his shirt. And then they went out and were looking for poisonous mushrooms. This is actually a poisonous amanita. It is similar to a destroying angel, but it is a little bit different. I believe it's currently classified as Amanita atkinsonia, or the Akebono dokutsuru take in Japan, that we found out here among a few other poisonous mushrooms that were featured on the show. This just a picture that I took in Sendai, Japan, of my favorite mushroom find in Japan. Look at this amazing flush of Pleurosobella porogens. This is angel wings, or Sugihiratake, which is a little bit of a controversial mushroom in Japan, because it is a mushroom which has been very popular as an edible mushroom for centuries. And then in the late 2000s, it was the cause of a major mushroom poisoning incident. Some people died, and then it happened again. There was another mushroom poisoning incident. People died, and now it is classified as a poisonous mushroom in Japan and throughout the world, actually. But there's a lot of people that don't buy it. I think, oh, maybe there were extenuating circumstances. There's actually been you might not know this, but there's been a paper recently. This didn't make it into my book because it happened after my book, but there's a paper published recently in Japan that isolated the toxin within Pleurosobella porogens, and has determined that it actually can, like, provably be dangerous to especially to people who have compromised organs. But it is I believe now that it is definitely a dangerous mushroom, but in small quantities, I might still eat it. That's an aside. So my book, Kinoko, A Window into the Mystical World of Japanese Mushrooms. This is a book that I wrote. It was, I guess you could call it my COVID project when we are all spending a lot of time indoors. This is the project I worked on. And I wanted to take all of the learnings that I had come up with living in Japan and hunting mushrooms and working with the mushroom community here, and put them into a book form of things that I thought were interesting that had never been published in English language before. So Kinoko, the name of the book, is the Japanese word for mushroom. And literally this comes from ki no ko, which means child of the trees, which I think is actually a really lovely word for mushroom. And it took me about 3 years to write, kind of off and on as a side project. And I put a whole lot of different types of prose and poetry into the book. There's a mini field guide. It's not comprehensive, but it gives you a taste. And I'll give you a taste during this talk of some of the common Japanese mushrooms you might encounter. I talk about how mushroom names are made and the language behind Japanese mushrooms. I translate a lot of essays and stories and poetry. One of the most salient parts of the book, I believe, is there are about 100 haiku that I have translated from Japanese into English, classical haiku about mushrooms. There's even a phrase book. If you go to Japan and venture off the beaten path to do mushroom hunting here, you can use the phrase book to maybe make some friends. There's a lot more. You can look at it at thekinokobook.com. You can order it in the UK off of Amazon, or there's also a digital version. Please check it out. So jumping into mushrooms in Japanese culture and an explanation. First, let me explain this book. This is a very interesting book. It hasn't been translated, but there are two volumes of this book. The personified mushroom field guide. This is a field guide to mushrooms where the author has made, you could say, like anime style women out of each of the different species of mushrooms, and given them lots of different features that characterize the actual mushrooms, and kind of made entire characters out of them. I believe there was a spin-off TV show. I don't think it was long-lived, but this is one of the directions in which mushroom love goes in Japan. Japanese people really love mushrooms, and actually, well, I'm on the top. The other day, I got a present from one of my friends here in Japan. This is another thing you can get in Japan. Is let's see here. I don't actually need to open it, but it's going to be worth it. Hold on. It's all sorts of Japanese mushroom chotskis, but these are mushroom earplugs. Look at that. This is a Amanita muscaria earplug, and actually I have like 5 different species of Japanese mushrooms as earplugs here. I want to take a nice close look. Look at the fidelity there. I don't know if you can make it out. There's also high resolution on the gills here of this little beautifully crafted earplug. Japanese mushrooms are loved here. They've been valued and enjoyed in the culture for many centuries. The earliest Japanese literature talks about mushrooms. And in traditional dishes and modern dishes, people still eat a lot of mushrooms. The average Japanese person consumes 4 kilograms of mushrooms per year, which makes it number 4 in the world. And if you go to a Japanese grocery store, I have a photo in my book, but you normally see maybe 7 to 10 different species of mushrooms being sold in an average grocery store. And many of them are difficult or impossible to find in the West. And some mushrooms are used for purported medicinal properties. There's not a lot of scientific evidence of this, as you may or may not know, but some mushrooms like Ganoderma lucidum and Grifola frondosa are purported to have medicinal effects. Some people here value them for that, but not as many as you might think. But especially Grifola frondosa, people just like it because it is delicious. So in terms of how do mushrooms grow in Japan? Well, to know a little bit about the Japanese geography, here's a map of Japan right here. It's about 1.5 times the size of the UK by area. And it has a lot of different terrains, very mountainous areas, valleys, forests, beaches. And the north of Japan and Hokkaido can get extremely snowy. The south of Japan, in Kyushu, Okinawa, and everything can be pretty much tropical. The climate is pretty temperate, but there are 4 distinct seasons by standard seasons, by mild spring, a hot, humid summer. There's a rainy season in June, And then there's the typhoon season, and then after the typhoon season in late September, you'll see a lot of mushrooms come up after the typhoons, and in the spring, in the summer in June during the rainy season. But after those typhoons and the temperature cools down in autumn, that's the real peak of mushroom growth in Japan. It's cool and pleasant. Go to the forests, you'll find lots of mushrooms everywhere. The father of Japanese mycology, a mycologist that all of you should know if you don't already, is Kumagusu Minakata. He was kind of an eccentric individual. He was very self-taught. He's said to have spoken 11 languages. And he traveled around the world. He was very passionate about mushroom and slime mold identification and taxonomy. He toured through the Caribbean and South America in a circus troupe, and while he was doing so, documented mushroom and slime molds. He became the premier expert in slime molds in Japan and gave a private lecture to Showa Emperor Hirohito, who came to the island where he was living, and walked him through the forest on a slime mold hunt. He contributed 50 articles to Nature back in the early days of the Nature journal, and his most famous work is the illustrated book of bionomics of Japanese fungi, which covers about 4,500 species of fungi with about 15,000 hand-drawn pictures. So he was very influential to the mycologists who came after him in Japan. The most influential mycologist of the modern era in Japan is a man named Tsugo Hongo, which is maybe a little bit noteworthy because hongo in Spanish means mushroom. Complete coincidence, but a lot of people like that. He was a doctor of mycology, not self-taught like Mr. Minakata. And he was known to collect mushrooms from temples and shrines within Japan and then take them back home or back to the university to study them. He traveled a lot. He was very active in the international community. He published 9 books, many of them field guides, over 130 scientific papers, discovered hundreds of new mushroom species in Japan. And he was also very involved in amateur mycological communities. He was famous for these meetups called the Hongo meetings, where you invite lots of mycologists and amateurs to just discuss mushrooms and mycology. So if you look at the history of a lot of the mushroom clubs in Japan, they trace back to him and the sort of movement that he started in Japan for amateurs to really get into mushrooms. Mushroom names in Japanese. I noticed there's a question in the chat. I'm going to answer it right now. Mushroom names in Japanese are called wame. Wame literally just means Japanese name. It's the common names that they use for mushrooms. And you may be familiar with some of them, like maitake, shiitake, matsutake. The wame system in Japan, unlike in English-speaking countries with our common names, is standardized. They say, we're going to take this common name, and this name is going to equal this species. And it is not extremely rigorous because there's only, there's a limit to how much you can control how people use words, but it's much more rigorous than in the English-speaking world. And because it has a little bit more level of rigor, the common names can be pretty reliable. And so they become quite popular, more popular than scientific names in Japanese. Also, for Japanese speakers, the Latin and some Greek and scientific names can be very difficult to pronounce. So the Japanese common names are very popular, and many people, even though they're quite, let's say, quite skilled amateurs in mushroom hunting or mushroom ID, may not know a lot of the scientific names in Japan. Wame are usually written in katakana, which is one of the scripts in Japanese, usually used for foreign words, but also used for biological terms. And about 75% of the Japanese mushroom common names end in take. And so Eric asked here about take. Take means mushroom. It is as a standalone word, it doesn't mean mushroom. Like the name of my book, Kinoko, means mushroom as a standalone name. But if it's in a compound with another word, it means mushroom. Now, you specifically asked, what about the etymology of take? So I studied this. I actually looked it up in my Dictionary of Mushroom Etymology, which is a real book that I have. And there are a few different explanations, and I talk about them in my book, but the most likely possibility is that it originally comes from a word meaning, not to be crude, but phallus or penis in Old Japanese. And then that eventually came to mean mushroom. And people don't think of it in a sexual way at all in modern Japanese, but the original etymology seems to be that it was connected to that. So some common words that you see in mushroom names I've pieced out here, and I won't go through the whole chart, but take is actually, I calculated it to be present in 75.8-ish % of mushroom names. They end in take. And so an example, hiratake is Pleurotus ostreatus, which means the flat mushroom. And I'll tell you many common Japanese names in just a minute that end in take to give you more examples. Something you may have heard of before is shimeji. Shimeji is about 1 in 20 mushrooms in Japan is a shimeji. But some people ask, what is a shimeji? And I actually have an essay in my book that I wrote about it. But a shimeji is not necessarily a certain species or genus of mushroom. It just means a mushroom that kind of looks a certain way. It's about as specific as the word toadstool is in English, which is to say not very much at all. But there are many different examples of shimeji in Japan, so you can read my book for further description of that. And so some fun Japanese mushroom names, ones that I like. So Amanita caesareoides is one of my favorite mushrooms in Japan. It is a very popular edible here. It is one of the wild edible mushrooms that people seek out the most. And the Japanese Caesar. It is in Japanese, it is called tamago take. And tamago take literally means egg mushroom. As you can see, it looks like a red egg when it's young. Amanita virginioides is called shiro onitake, which means white oni mushroom. And I really like that all of the spiky mushrooms like this, the mushrooms where the veil gives it a sort of spiky appearance, either on the stem or usually on the top of the cap, they're referred to as the oni mushrooms. Now, oni are well, they're not always this cute, but the demons that you see on the right there, a type of Japanese demon, and they have not only 2 little horns on their head, which of which these small pieces of universal veil might be evocative. They also have spiky clubs that they use as weapons, and so that is most likely the etymology of this mushroom. Resembles the oni's clubs, so it's an oni mushroom. Ganoderma aplanatum has a little bit of a long common name, Kofuki saru no koshikake. Kofuki means dust blowing, and indeed the spores of Ganoderma aplanatum are just all over the place. So that kind of makes sense. Saru no koshikake, the latter part of the common name there, means monkey seat. And actually, in general, the large kind of shelf-shaped polypore mushrooms are known as monkey seeds in Japan, just because they can grow large enough to be a seat on the side of a tree. There are a lot of monkeys in Japan, and so maybe you see a monkey sitting on a Ganoderma applanatum. I don't know. I love the imagery though. Hydnum repandum has a relatively simple name, but Kanoshita, so it's not called a hedgehog mushroom here, it's called a deer's tongue mushroom. And it took me a long time to find a picture of a deer's tongue for you, but this is apparently what it looks like. They're scratchy in the same way that a cat's tongue is scratchy. And so this is what the spines on Hydnum repandum remind people of in Japan. And morels are not super common in Japan, but they do grow here. There are a few different species of mushrooms of morel mushrooms that grow here. And Morchella esculenta is called amigasatake in Japanese. And this is translated to the netted cap mushroom. And I actually didn't know this until I wrote the book, but this sort of netted cap, the amigasa that they talk about, is an old type of hat that people wore in Japan several centuries ago. And the appearance of the hat, especially the kind of netted part, which I believe you put your eyes behind and it kind of covers your eyes, is evocative of the shape of a morel mushroom and all of the folds over the fertile layer of the mushroom. So I really like that sort of comparison as well. And Omphalodus japonicus, which is the Japanese jack-o'-lantern mushroom, is called tsukiyotake, which means moonlit night mushroom. And the etymology of this mushroom, you can think, well, does it brighten up the forest as much as a moonlit night? Is it kind of like moonlight? I don't know if there's an exact correct explanation, but I really like the imagery of a moonlit night and this mushroom glowing here. Obviously, it's been known for centuries in Japan as well that this is a mushroom that is bioluminescent and glows in the dark, and that's shown in the name. So a few well-known Japanese mushrooms, ones that you should know if you're going to Japan or if you like Japanese cooking. Most of these that I'm going to talk about are edible. So shiitake, I think probably everybody knows. You might call it shiitake, but from now on you're going to call it shiitake because you know that's how it's said. This is Lentinula edores, and literally means Castanopsis mushroom, Castanopsis being a genus of tree from which it likes to grow. And one of its distinctive traits is the white patches on the cap. It fruits here from summer to fall, and it's the most popular mushroom to grow in Japan yourself. They sell shiitake logs in stores and online that anybody can grow them. It's so popular in cooking. People like to chop it up and cook it with rice. They like to just cut off the caps and grill the caps and serve them with some citrus. They like to stir fry it with other food. You may or may not know that there's a small percentage of people, I think 5 to 10% maybe, that get a skin condition called shiitake flagellate dermatitis if they eat the mushroom raw. Looks like someone has whipped your body, especially your back, when you eat it raw and might be itchy. So always cook your shiitake. Buna shimeji, sometimes just called shimeji in Japan. Hypsizygous tessellatus is called the beech shimeji, is the literal translation of Buna shimeji because it likes to grow from beech trees. The marbled surface of the caps, which can be anywhere from white to brown, is very distinctive, and also kind of just the overall shape of it. It fruits in late fall, and this is one of the most popular mushrooms for Japanese cooking. I might say it's more common than shiitake. Very common to put in soups like miso soup. You can simmer it with food, simmer it with like sweet soy sauce or something like that. Stir fry it. This is usually the most prominent mushroom when I come into the grocery. It's right in front. And like I said before, these are often called shimeji, just in a common way of referring to them, but shimeji can really refer to many different types of mushrooms in Japan, including a few poisonous and several edible ones. Enoki take, aka enoki. This is Flammulina filiformis. It's not Flammulina velutipes, although people used to think it was. This literally translates as the Chinese hackberry mushroom, enoki being a type of tree, the Chinese hackberry tree, from which sometimes it grows. In nature, you'll find it has these olive brown caps and very fuzzy stems, which can be dark brown at the base. It fruits from October to September, loves decaying deciduous wood. And in the grocery, you will very rarely, if ever, find it looking brown and big and fruity. The enoki that they grow that they sell in the grocery has been specially cultivated so that it is long and thin and white, just for culinary reasons. This is used in hot pots so commonly for hot soups and things like that. People will cook it with pastas, stir fries, and there's a condiment which is relatively popular, very popular among mushroom lovers, called nametake, where you take these enoki mushrooms, you simmer them in a mixture of soy sauce, sugar, mirin, cooking sake, and vinegar, and then you bottle them like that, and you can add it to rice for a tasty umami flavor. Here's a mushroom you probably know and love because it's pretty international, maitake, or Grifola frondosa, a hen of the woods mushroom. Grifola frondosa or maitake. So maitake means dancing mushroom, literally, in Japanese. And the common explanation is that when you find it, you are so happy that you dance. So the maitake, you might know, but it's a polypore with fan-shaped caps. It can get very large in the wild in Japan. I've seen clusters that are 30 centimeters, maybe even half meter in diameter. It fruits in the autumn around deciduous trees. It's very popular in hot pots. It's very popular as tempura. So I have a picture of maitake tempura here, where they just battered it and fried it, and it is definitely the most popular mushroom to fry and eat like this. I eat it often; it's great. I also often cook with rice. Some people say that it may have beneficial effects against cancer, cholesterol, diabetes, but the jury is still out on the medical research level about this. Hiratake, Chloros ostriatus, this is oyster mushroom. So it's very popular in Japan as well. Literally means flat mushroom from the shape of the caps. And as you probably know, it's grayish brown caps with decurrent gills. Grows from decaying deciduous wood all over the year, but less in the summer. And this is very popular in pasta, soups, stir fries. And you may or may not know, it's kind of carnivorous in that its hyphae can prey on microscopic nematodes to get nitrogen. Not super relevant, but I like the mushroom. This is not as popular as some of the other mushrooms, but you'll still occasionally see it in Japanese cooking. Nameko, or Pholiota microspora, is a beautiful slimy mushroom that you'll see in stores quite often. It literally means slimy mushroom. And the caps are reddish brown and have a lot of sliminess to them, especially when wet. They like to grow in dense clusters out of decaying deciduous wood, usually in the fall. And they're very popular in miso soup. This is the most common way of consuming them. I also know it seems to be very common to go to on Nameko hunts as an event. Like I have several friends who've gone Nameko hunting, even though they're not big mushroom hunters otherwise. So in the fall, it's a very popular mushroom to seek out. Kikurage. This is Auricularia various species. I think they've said it's about 4 different species that are kind of all classified under this name. So this common name is kind of due for reclassification, but literally translates as tree jellyfish, this is one of my favorite common names in Japanese. You may have consumed this mushroom before. It's common in the West as well, but they have gelatinous fruiting bodies that kind of look like floppy ears or inverted cups. And the upper side has a fine fuzz to it. And they grow from decaying deciduous wood from spring to autumn, especially in September or later, and even kind of going into the winter a little bit. Hon shimeji or Liophyllum shimeji is the original shimeji. That's what its common name means. This is a supermarket mushroom that you see occasionally. I would say I see it at 1 out of every 4 or 5 supermarkets that I go to, but it's one of my favorites. It tastes really good. So white to grayish brown cap, white stem, bulging base. This is a mycorrhizal mushroom that likes to grow in mixed woods in the fall. And it can be eaten in soups, sautés with butter and soy sauce, tempura, cooked with rice, cream pasta. This is an interesting mushroom in that it is mycorrhizal, but Japanese mushroom cultivators have managed to cultivate it under artificial conditions. So it's sold in the store and it's not wild, it's cultivated. Another name which sometimes people use to refer to this mushroom as is daikoku shimeji. Daikoku-ten being the cute little man. He's the pudgy deity of prosperity in Japan, and the resemblance of the kind of pudgy mushroom, especially the pudgy base of the stem, being evocative of this god, is where that name comes from. Hanabira take, or Spiraceus latifolia. This is a relative of the cauliflower mushroom that you may know from the West. In Japanese, it means flower petal mushroom. I think that the name is pretty self-explanatory. It's a mass of white wavy lobes, like flower petals or pieces of lasagna, and it grows around the base of coniferous trees. Japanese larch is the tree that it prefers the most. It fruits from summer to fall, has a crisp texture, and it's cooked in stir fries, soups, sometimes marinated and put in salads, or dried and used for soup stock. One thing I might say is actually all of these mushrooms can be dried and used for soup stock, and it's a common thing to do in Japan. A few more mushrooms. Mukitake, or Sarcomyxa edulis, is the name translates as peelable mushroom because you can peel the cap off of it actually pretty easily. These are light yellow brown, sometimes purplish a little bit, with caps that you can peel off. Grows from decaying deciduous wood in the fall, and it softens when it cooks. It's a little bit of a hard texture before that. It's popular in soups, stews, stir fries. And it's similar in appearance to the Japanese jack-o'-lantern, Omphallotus japonicus, but it doesn't have a dark base or a ring on the stem. So it's pretty easy to distinguish for mushroom hunters. This next mushroom is one of the most popular mushrooms in classical Japan, although in modern Japan it is not known as well as it used to be. This used to be one of the most prized mushrooms out there, and this is the Hatsutake, or Lactarius lividatus. This is literally translates as first mushroom because it's one of the first mushrooms that fruits in the fall, signals the onset of mushroom season. As you can see, this is a milk cap, and it has a lot of characteristics of your average milk cap, a zonate cap. This one is reddish brown. It releases dark red liquid, latex, when scratched, and then that fades to a bluish green bruise after it dries. It grows under conifers in the early fall, and it is a delicious mushroom. You can simmer it, stir fry, deep fry, make into soups, cook with rice to add flavor. And yeah, used to be a very popular mushroom, not as much anymore. I already talked about the Amendias ciceroides, tamagotake. This is, it has a very strong umami flavor, very delicious. And it's popular in omelets, which is more of a Western import, a way of cooking. Stir fries, simmer dishes, soups, raw and sliced in with olive oil and lemon is another Western import, but people do it here too. Or again, cooked with rice to add flavor to it. Another mushroom, which if you read my book, I have a whole story about it, but is koutake. And koutake is Sarcodon asperatus, and it is literally means sweet smelling mushroom. It has a very wonderful smell to it. Smells a little bit like sweet soy sauce, actually, and some people say you can smell it from a long ways away and they find it by the smell. It's a scaly brown cap, and the underside has these spiny white teeth. It grows on the ground in coniferous deciduous mixed forest areas in the fall. And it's often cooked with rice in takikomi gohan, which is where you cut it up and you cook it when you're cooking rice. This is a mushroom like morels, which is poisonous when raw, but delicious when cooked. Shoro, Rhizopogon roseolis, is the, you can call it the Japanese truffle, although it's not technically a truffle. It's, I guess you could call it a false truffle. The name literally means pine dew. They like to grow underneath pine trees and usually kind of submerged in the soil, but if you dig at the soil, you can find them. They're white when they're fresh. It stains red when it's damaged. It likes the sandy soil under black pines. It smells sweet and has a very umami taste to it. And it's sometimes eaten in soup, but yeah, the most popular is slicing it thin and grilling it with salt. This used to be a popular wild delicacy that even the average person knew about, but with the advent of supermarket mushrooms, it is less well known, but it is still sought out by Japanese mushroom hunters and enthusiasts. Hana-iguchi, Swillus reveille. This is one I think you might have in the UK as well. We had it in the US, but in Japanese, the name means flower bullied, and the reason being it is very colorful and beautiful like a flower. This has a shiny, sticky, reddish brown cap. The underside is covered in fine, bright yellow pores. And it usually grows around Japanese larch, September or later. This is often eaten in soup, stir fries, marinated in salad. It's a very colorful and easy to find mushroom and quite popular. And mushroom that any discussion of Japanese mushrooms cannot ignore is the matsutake mushroom, Trichoderma matsutake. You probably know that its common name means pine mushroom. It's certainly called pine mushroom as a common name in English as well. And it is white cap, but it's scaly, covered in brown fibrous scales. It's a strong smell. People compare it to all sorts of stuff: cinnamon, cedar, dirty socks, a gym locker room, red hot candy. It grows near coniferous trees in the fall. And common ways to eat it in Japan are to boil it in soups, to grill it over charcoal, to fry it as tempura, or to cook it with rice. The last one, cooking with rice, is certainly the most common here. But if you go to a very fancy restaurant, sliced and grilled over charcoal is also pretty common. This is the only foraged mushroom that you usually find in supermarkets. Maybe if you go into a small market in rural Japan, you can find other foraged mushrooms, but usually the majority of mushrooms you find will be cultivated ones, but matsutake is an exception. And then one very poisonous mushroom, just to talk about because it's quite distinctive, is Podostroma cornudime or cayenne take, literally the flame mushroom. It is bright red, hard to the touch. It grows from sick and decaying oak tree roots in the fall. It is extremely poisonous with trichothecene toxins in it. And even a very small amount can lead to death if you eat it. Stomach pains, peeling skin, shrinking of the brain, multiple organ failure. It is one of the most well-known in Japan poisonous mushrooms. And there is a very commonly believed rumor that if you touch it, it will cause dermatitis. Don't touch it. It's a cautionary sign on the right here that I took a picture of. It says, "Caution, beware of the cayenne take. Even if you touch it, it will cause your skin to inflame. If you eat it, you might die." But this is probably a myth that touching it will cause dermatitis. I've asked many of my Japanese friends. I have an essay in my book about it, actually, and none of them ever have known anyone who's touched it and gotten a rash or inflamed skin. And I went on a mushroom hunt and found it and touched it quite a bit, and it didn't do anything to my skin at all. So it does have these toxins in it. These toxins can cause skin irritation in the lab or in experiments. And maybe it's possible that if you were handling the mushroom and your hands were very wet and maybe the mushroom was kind of crushed up, maybe there are some conditions in which it might inflame your skin, but I don't know anyone who's ever had it happen. So it might be an old wives' tale to keep kids from touching it because touching it could lead to eating it, but don't really know about that. So anyway, let's transition from the deadliest mushroom in Japan to calming down, relaxing, and looking at some Japanese haiku to finish out our talk. So for this book, I translated over 100 different haiku that I found in Japanese literature. I wasn't able to translate too many modern ones. I got a few modern haiku donated to me from a haiku society that held a haiku circle specifically about mushrooms for the book. But most of the haiku that I brought in, I picked older ones so they would be out of copyright, and that they would also just sort of reflect that people have been writing about mushrooms in Japan for centuries, but even in the older haiku, you can really understand that it's still relevant in the modern times. So quick about Japanese mushrooms in literature. Wild mushrooms have appeared in literature since the beginning of Japanese literature. In the 8th century, the Nihon Shoki, an old piece of literature, talked about wild mushrooms as food and offerings to the gods. And there's even stories in old Japanese literature about using poisonous mushrooms to poison people as like assassination plots. They're a very common theme in poetry, especially in haiku. And in my opinion, they're timeless and spaceless. These mushrooms just take you into the forest when you're mushroom hunting, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It doesn't matter when you are in history. The feeling of hunting mushrooms in the forest is the same. And I picked out a few of my favorite poems that I translated, and I'd like to read them for you. So this first one by famous Japanese haiku poet named Matsuo Basho. I came home after a day of mushroom hunting. Then the rain began. This is, I like this. You get home, you close the door, and then a downpour starts. This is probably a good thing because you just escaped the rain, and then maybe the next day it'll mean more mushrooms be fruiting as well. But I like the imagery of it. Ah, the loneliness in the small sunken puddle on a mushroom's cap. This is by a poet named Suzuki Michiko, and I just really love. I found this picture that I just happened to have in my photos, and it really reflected how I feel when I read this poem. Ah, hunting mushrooms. The forest's fallen leaves crunch under straw sandals. You can feel a little bit of history here, of how people don't really wear straw sandals in the forest anymore, but the feeling of just walking alone through a forest and hearing the sounds of the autumn leaves crunching under your feet is pretty universal, I think. Early summer's rains brought mushrooms, small and yellow, alongside your grave. So this one is, I think I don't know, kind of makes you think. You feel the emotion here of the person who's writing it. A quiet cabin, hunting milk caps, I was soon lost among the pines. This is a famous haiku poet named Shiko who wrote this. And actually, I translated it as milk caps, but this is talking about the hatsutake mushrooms, the Lactarius lividatus that I talked about earlier, which is a very popular mushroom to hunt, especially back in 1700s. Behold what I found, and others missed, clad in dew, 5 matsutake. So this one here is, I think, a very triumphant poem about a mushroom hunt. I felt this way. Well, I've seen other people feel this way more than I felt this way myself, but I think we can relate. Hunting mushrooms, and I can hear little giggles from all around me. This one is a little bit open to interpretation. The little giggles could just be maybe kids that you're hunting mushrooms with, but I think it's maybe a little bit more likely that it's referring to the mushrooms themselves. Maybe they're laughing at you because you can't find them. If you've ever had a mushroom hunt where you know there are mushrooms around, but you're just not seeing them, I think that's what this is getting at. This photo I took, by the way, is on trails on Mount Fuji, hunting mushrooms in the fog. As I hunt mushrooms, my breath grows ragged until I'm one with the wind. This poem is written by Shiki, who's a very prolific haiku poet and wrote about mushrooms a lot. Shiki actually had tuberculosis and had breathing problems. So this is in a kind of reference to, like, maybe he was hunting and he's walking around a whole lot and he got short of breath, and then suddenly he felt like he was one with the wind. But I think even people without tuberculosis can relate to this feeling of being so immersed that now you're part of nature or part of the wind as you're hunting. And yeah, so that's what I have for you today. And I think I could talk for a lot longer, but I know it's getting late for you guys on your end. So I'd like to finish up and say thank you very much. Some resources. Honestly, there aren't a lot of other resources in English language. There are a few books that have been written specifically about matsutake and shiitake, but very little that's been written about Japanese mushrooms in general. There's a website that you could read with, say, like Google Translate or something like that, which is the most prolific Japanese mushroom blog. It's called Kinoko Bito, and I have a link there. There's Kinoko Bu, which is the largest Japanese mushroom group on Facebook, but most of the conversation there is in Japanese. There's some haiku poets that you can look up, and other people have done some translations, although not mostly mushrooms. But if you want to read about nature, Matsuo Basho, Kobayashi Isa, and Kagano Chiyojo are 3 poets I really recommend. My book is thekinokobook.com. Or you can just look up kinoko and mushroom, and I think you'll probably find it, especially if you look on Amazon. You can find these presentation slides at tinyurl.com/kinoko-BMS if you want to refer to them later. So I'll stop sharing my slides now, but thank you everybody, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, you answered the first one, the take, so we've done that one. The next one is from Liam. He said, I'd love to know whether any of these names are inspired by Japanese folklore or Shintoism. It seems more standardized than English common names, but a lot more of them refer to folklore.
So that's a great question. Absolutely right. Japanese folklore has inspired a lot of these mushrooms. So I did talk briefly about Oni, the Japanese demons with the spiked clubs, and how they've inspired mushroom names in the mushrooms with the spiky parts on top of the caps. There are a few other mushrooms, and I talk about it in my book, but one of the most salient ones, and I know there's actually a question about it, so I'm going to knock this question out at the same time, but is Tengu. So Tengu take, which is Amanita pantherina, is referring to Tengu, which is a Japanese folkloric creature. Tengu are these types of demons that live in the forest. They live up in the trees. They can fly. They have very long red noses. They have feet which are high up off the ground because they wear these wooden sandals with like a single tooth that they kind of walk on. And they're a forest deity that if you wander out too far into the forest, they might get you. So maybe they were a way for parents to tell their kids not to wander off too far. But Tengu take, specifically Amanita pantherina, but also less specifically, all of the Amanita genus are called the Tengu mushrooms. And so they are very linked to the folklore. And the reason for this is debatable. The Tengu mushrooms, it might be just because a lot of Amanitas are scary, they're poisonous, they're dangerous, and these demons are also dangerous. It could be that you find them in the deep forest, and you find the Tengu in the deep forest. You want to go find Amanita, you go deep into the forest and look for them. Another thing could be the kind of the shape of Amanita, which often have very large caps and are kind of taller than a lot of the other mushrooms, could be reminiscent of how the Tengu demons are kind of on top of those wooden sandals, the geta, like I described. But we don't really know where it came from. We just know that that's that. And there are actually a lot more folkloric names, some more that I talk about in my book. But yeah, there is definitely a lot of inspiration. People think about it, especially if you're kind of alone in the forest. It's maybe only natural to start thinking about demons and folklore and gods and things like that.
Yeah. He also asks, and I think the question might be, the answer might be is about the same as here. How good and bad are mushroom hunts during the winter in Japan?
I would say not very good. I would say not very good. In the winter in Japan, sometimes the mushroom you might find the most often are the kikurage, the auricularia, the, what do you call them, Judas ears, the jelly mushrooms.
Yeah.
You'll find those occasionally in the winter. There are a couple other that people go out and find, but for the most part, people stay in the winter. And the winter is a common time for kind of cultivating at home with your shiitake logs, or just, staying inside, talking on mushroom forums and talking about where you're going to go in the spring. The hunts aren't that good in the winter, but in the fall they are top.
Okay. Ed has asked, and I'm sure this is a question that everybody's thought, because we think about it here as well. How often do people in Japan misidentify poisonous mushrooms for edible ones?
Quite often. You might say, oh, well, Japanese people are more aware of mushrooms, so maybe they do it less. But by the same token, Japanese people are less afraid of going out and hunting for wild mushrooms.
Yeah,
so you have more opportunity to make mistakes. The most common by far is people go out, they go out looking for shiitake because everyone knows shiitake. And they find the tsukiyotake, the Japanese jack-o'-lantern mushrooms instead. And there are, of course, distinguishing traits, but if you're not an experienced mushroom hunter, you might not know. And they pick the jack-o'-lantern mushrooms instead, eat them, get sick, probably don't die, but probably get pretty sick. Sometimes they die. I mean, you have in Japan, you find senior citizens, people over the age of 80 or 90 are still pretty active in mushroom hunting. And when you get up to that age and you get bad mushroom poisoning, it could be fatal. So you do hear about some fatal issues, but typically don't happen to experienced mushroom hunters. These are just the sort of casual mushroom hunters that maybe, you know, their parents or their grandparents mushroom hunted. They do it occasionally, but they're not super careful about it. They're not really involved in mushroom clubs, and they go out looking for something like shiitake and they come back with poisonous mushroom and get sick.
What else have we got? Mariko asks, is Lactarius lividatus a synonym of Lactarius hatsudake?
It is. It is 100% a synonym of Lactarius hatsudake. And since I started writing the book, which name is correct has gone back and forth a few times. I'm not sure where we're at the moment.
Yeah.
But yes, same thing.
Well, I mean, I was interested in the forgotten the name of it now, but the DNA now. Everybody's doing DNA, and we're finding out a lot more. And we thought this species was the same, and that species was say, and I think things are changing fairly rapidly now. Ed says again, he saw Matsutake from the Himalayas for sale in Japan, and he wasn't sure how sustainable that trade was. I don't know whether you know anything about that.
That's an interesting comment. So in Japan, I would say by the numbers, most of the Matsutake you see in stores is not native to Japan. You see Chinese Matsutake very commonly, maybe a little bit from Himalayas, from Korea, even as far as the US. Sometimes you'll see Matsutake here. And that's because Matsutake has been, let's say, a little bit overhunted in Japan, and that has made it, let's just say, it's very hard to find because someone will have found it first in the fall. Another thing is that the habitat for Matsutake has, year over year, has been reducing in Japan. There's less Matsutake, and it's due to the sickness of the pine forest, the pines where the Matsutake used to grow, maybe a little bit of deforestation as well. So it's harder to get Matsutake than it used to be. So the price of Japanese Matsutake has skyrocketed. It could be very, very expensive. We're talking on the order of, I don't know, like if you have a very good Japanese Matsutake, you can be looking at over $200, $300 USD. So they can be very expensive, but the imported Matsutake can be much cheaper. Some people are purists and only buy the Japanese grown Matsutake, whereas a lot of the mushroom hunters will they'll find Matsutake or they'll find one of Matsutake's close relatives. There are numerous other tricholomas that are kind of close to the flavor of Matsutake, but are a little bit different. A year or two ago, one of my mushroom hunting friends sent me something called Baka Matsutake, which literally translates to idiot's Matsutake. The idiot's Matsutake is, it grows under deciduous trees. And only an idiot would look for Matsutake under deciduous trees. This is where the name comes from. But the flavor and smell is actually quite similar to Matsutake, and I ate it with rice and it was quite good.
Yeah, everybody's enjoyed your talk, and people who like me have enjoyed the haiku. A lot of people have said they enjoyed the haiku. So it's just something different that we enjoy. And I think I said to you earlier, I think we can all relate to it. Those of us who sort of wander through the woods looking for things, very much relate to it. I think it's very good. Ed has asked a couple of other things about this, which we sort of covered about the DNA and stuff, and that there's sort of reclassification of Flammulina was what I was thinking of earlier. You know, the Flammulina veluti piece that we get looks very, very similar to yours, but is from the DNA has been reclassified. I mean, we're all hoping that eventually that settles down.
Absolutely.
We don't keep renaming everything.
Anyway, yeah, I will say it's actually very common. There have been several Japanese mushrooms that after DNA testing have had to do reclassification. Honestly, DNA taxonomy in Japan, there aren't quite enough people doing it and doing rigorous studies. There are, of course, active mycologists in Japan. My book talks about several of them, but there aren't enough to cover all of the taxonomy and all of the Japanese mushrooms that are out there. So I think we will see more reclassifications as people get around to doing DNA taxonomy, phylogeny, and just writing the research papers about them.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing it here. We're seeing it here.
Like right now, it's in this that a lot of the mushrooms.
David asks, are there boletes found and prized in Japan? I think you had you certainly had one, the flower bolete, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yes, but yes, there certainly are, and even the like Boletus edulis, the king bolete, is in Japan, and people find it and eat it and like it. It's not as well known, but mushroom hunters know it and like it. There are several boletes. Boletes can be quite popular. It's a little bit more rare, but there's a stark white bolete called I guess it's called shiroiguchi, which means white bolete. I forgot what the scientific name for it is, but it's only in Asia, and it's just like, imagine a king bolete, except it's 100% white. All of the elements of it are white, and that's actually a very delicious and kind of eaten bolete. But yes, boletes are quite popular in Japan. People like them.
Okay, right. We've got a few more. You sort of cover this in your book that this wasn't a big deal. Are there magic mushrooms in Japan? From what I read in your book, there seem not to be this interest in hallucinogens.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, are the mushrooms in Japan? Yes. Psilocybe mushrooms in Japan, there are, I think, about 7 different species of them, 2 or 3 being relatively common. And they exist. They are currently illegal in Japan to possess or to pick, and of course to consume as well. There's not really any sort of psychedelic mushroom culture in Japan. It's just nothing. It's just something that's never been present in Japanese culture from anything that I've read. There are old stories about eating some sort of mushrooms and dancing through the night, which may be attributed to some sort of, probably not psilocybe, but a different sort of mushroom. There are some stories, but like, is there a culture in Japan, like there is in the West, of people finding these mushrooms, cultivating these mushrooms themselves, eating them, having psychedelic experiences? No, not in Japan.
Okay. Mariko asks, says, Japan is a large country. The most important wild one, presumably that's wild mushroom as food in the north, they believe as Suelius. How about in the south? Example, Okinawa, or does it vary?
I would say it certainly can vary. And in the south, in Okinawa, you definitely have different types of mushrooms that you wouldn't find in the north. You wouldn't find as far north as Honshu or Hokkaido. But in terms of which wild mushrooms are popular in which parts of Japan, I haven't really studied that much. I just more looked at them kind of collectively across the country, which ones are popular. So I would think that a lot of the mushrooms that I shared in the popular wild mushrooms or well-known wild mushrooms section of my talk. I think some of those would still be quite popular in Okinawa, but I couldn't tell you which one is most important.
No, fair comment. Okay, I think we're there. I think we're just about there. I just want to flick through, but I think we're just about there. Yeah, I think that's about it, really. That was brilliant. I as I said to you earlier, I really enjoyed your book, and I would recommend it to all the people who are watching. And I'm not even getting commission. And an interesting thing, because what is interesting about it is the similarities and the differences. You know, we don't tend to. I mean, some people do, but haiku is not a British or an American form. But when you read them, you could, because they're about what you know. You have the you can relate to it. You can relate to it. I think it's very interesting and different. I've learned a lot from it. It's very interesting. Okay, I think we need Sally back, probably, if she's listening.
Yes, I'm here. Are you ready to finish?
Yeah, I think we're done.
Okay.
Anyway, I looked it up online, and I just wanted to say arigato.
Itashimashite. Thank you. Arigato gozaimasu to you and everyone who's listening for attending this talk and being interested in Japanese mushrooms. I would say definitely please get my book. If you have any questions, my email is on my website, on the Kinoko Book website. By all means, feel free to ask me questions. I love emails about mushrooms. As I said, my day job is engineering. Not a lot of crossover with mushrooms, so please contact me and make me happy so I can talk about mushrooms more.
Okay, thank you again. Thank you very much.